Here's a passionate new writer with a fresh, exciting book idea. Just look at that enthusiasm. His creativity is undeniable, but when it comes to execution, he's at a bit of a loss. So seeking answers, he turns to the greatest oracle of our time for guidance. But instead, he's hit with a severe case of imposter syndrome, making his work feel subpar. Now everything he writes seems like garbage, if he manages to write at all. Overwhelmed by chronic inferiority, he does the world a favor and quits. Okay, I'm being a little dramatic, but does any of this sound familiar to you? While not every writer has the same journey, a vast majority can relate to being overwhelmed by online advice and its impact on them. How many writers' dreams have been crushed by feelings of inadequacy? How many stories will remain untold because we've sterilized the creative process? Is it possible to overcome this yourself? Well, a certain someone I know did.
Hello, that would be me.
This is me, I'm Mary. I'm no pro, just someone who's fed up with some writing issues that don't seem to get addressed much. As I've grown over the years as a writer, I've come to learn how damaging bad advice can be after falling victim to it. There are thousands of articles handing out advice, and it's overwhelming. With so many conflicting voices, it's tough to sift through all the noise and find what's actually helpful.
It's perfectly natural for a writer to strive to be better. That's the goal, isn't it? But in trying to improve, you might become critical of yourself to an unhealthy amount. Add a bit of perfectionism and you have a bad mix. There's a lot of good advice from established authors on the internet, and it helps a lot of people. But what a lot of new writers forget is that everyone is biased. These authors are using what works for them, and it may not work for you. A common piece of advice that I see a lot online is to copy your favorite writer's writing style. The problem with this, though, is that you can compare yourself too much to the voice of another author. So when you decide to write in your own style, it sounds inexperienced. Because you're not used to hearing your own voice, you automatically assume it's bad because it sounds like it came from you, which isn't a bad thing at all. Copying someone else's style can stifle your own writing flow because it's the way someone else thinks, even if it does work sometimes. I feel like it worked best for me to find my writing voice by just not comparing myself to anyone else and just sitting down and getting it on the paper without focusing too much on being someone you're not. You'll have to be comfortable with it being stiff though, which is completely natural at first. In fact, you might always find you're writing a little stiff on the first draft. But the more you become comfortable with sounding bad, your voice will improve a lot faster. Yes, it'll probably need refining, but we're going to focus on that later, not now. Of all the dangerous advice I've seen, I think the push to be unique above everything else is probably one of the worst. There is a never-ending stress online to sound new, to sound unique, and that's even at the cost of your writing. If you find yourself scrolling through lists on blogs, you'll find that your book fits quite a few of these cliches, and it doesn't feel good at all. That's usually where I would give up on my book completely and start a whole new one. On the topic of cliches, I think we are focusing too much on them now. I'm not saying that there aren't overused cliches. There are quite a lot that I would like to see leave fiction altogether, to be honest. But I think we're going about it the wrong way. It's true when they say every book has been done before. That sounds really disheartening as a new writer, but that's not a bad thing. Sometimes it's actually for a very good reason. The presence of a cliche doesn't automatically make it bad, it's how you tell it that defines it. A lot of new writers avoid cliches altogether like the plague because they don't want to sound like everybody else. I do not believe cliches are inherently bad. There is a reason why we keep coming back to good versus evil, because it works and because it's life. Most unique books are the same story over and over again. Good books have a healthy amount of cliches that are mashed together just in the right way that makes it feel like we are hearing a new story all over again. Don't focus on too much on being unique right now. Focus on telling a good story in your own voice. Do you know what one of the biggest issues with devouring advice online can be? Adding too many expectations for yourself. If you go into it with so many goals that you have set yourself to meet and you don't meet them, it's incredibly discouraging. Even though a lot of writers push things such as writing 1,000 words a day, if you set these boundaries for yourself and you don't meet them, it's incredibly discouraging. It can even stifle your creativity. I was constantly trying to be ready before I started writing, waiting forever until I got the perfect idea for an opening to my book, which meant that sometimes I spent almost a whole year doing nothing. It's impossible to know everything when you start writing. Don't expect yourself to know everything when you first begin your book. And if you watch over videos with the thought that this advice will finally fix my writing, well, you set yourself up for failure a bit. Because if you don't meet those writing expectations, then you start to think, maybe there's something wrong with me. There could be, but that's not it. There will be days of absolutely horrid writing, and that's okay. It'll take some getting used to. It is very hard to get over the perfectionism, but we're supposed to be focusing on a first draft, to remember, and that's where I'd like to get onto the confusion between the writing and editing process. One of my worst problems was comparing my writing to a finished product when I was only on the first draft, forgetting that to get to a finished book, there's a whole background of editing that it goes through, including multiple drafts. Articles and videos forget to point that out. Everyone's book will be ugly at first. There are a few people who have been absolute prodigies, but they're different. Writing is sort of like painting in the way that there are multiple layers before you get to the details and the highlights. You can't do the highlights before you've done the base. It just won't work. I spent way too much time focusing on getting my writing perfect, such as sifting through my writing each session to take out passive voice and replace it with active, or remove parts where I've blabbed on too much in a long description. Or maybe, when I haven't talked enough, adding more and more when I should just move on and continue to the next scene. Just start now. Make it coherent, but fix the grammar and little mistakes at the end of each writing session after you're done at the end of the day. Don't go full on into editing though. Stop yourself before you go too far. Never write with editing in mind. There is a lot of material online when it comes to discouraging writers, like a lot. But one I particularly hate is this narrative that the chances of getting published and taking off as a writer are very slim. It's the worst possible thing you could say to someone who wants to write. And even though a lot of people just write because they want to, it still is very discouraging to hear. And it's not always true. As long as you keep at it and write consistently, there's actually a chance that it could work. And there's a lot of talk that if you are not a published writer, then you're not really a writer yet. As long as you are writing, you're a writer now. Staring at a blank page also technically counts. You're writing in your head. It'll get down on the paper eventually. There is also this fear of books becoming obsolete. Years ago, they said ebooks would completely replace books. So far, that hasn't been true. Maybe down the line it might. I still think that a lot of people want physical copies now. So is there a secret to getting back into writing? Sort of. You know what it is? Make your writing fun again. That's really it. The reason everything used to be fun was because you used to write with no expectations and because you wanted to. And that's what we need to be doing again. Sounds easy, but when your inner critic has been nagging at you for so long, it's actually incredibly hard to find your love for writing again. If you write with so many expectations and a set of guidelines you want to follow, it will become stiff and you give yourself no wiggle room. Firstly, if you get an idea as you write, there is nothing wrong with either keeping it down in a note or writing it then and there. It's not like there is a strict set of rules that is put out for writers. You can always change things later. If you don't feel that you want it in there anymore, then remove it. But there's no harm in adding it now. This is in no way recommending you don't have an outline. I really recommend you have an outline, even if it's a simple one. Just don't focus too much on strictly following the outline. If it feels like it needs to change, it probably might need to change. And that's okay. For writing to be fun again, you have to relearn how to enjoy the process, which means letting it be messy. Stop stressing about it being perfect. Just tell the story. Write as if you were almost writing the outline that you're going to work on later. Leave it for future you to do the polishing up and the beautifying of it all. You will have days where you find it hard to write and there will be ups and downs. That's fine. Everyone goes through that. It's hard to be constantly pumping out good writing. But sometimes just write, even if it's bad. You can fix it later. Just try to get it done. That's the focus on your first draft. Get it finished. Then you have something to work with. You can't work with nothing. You'll always be critical of your writing. Even your most favorite authors, if you look at what they've said, some of them are still picky with their writing. And yet, they're our favorite books. This isn't meant as discouragement. In fact, to encourage you that it's not that your writing's bad, it's just that you can't help criticizing yourself. It's hard to get over, but you'll get there. I want to stress that none of this is an attack on any of the authors on YouTube or elsewhere. You should just discern for yourself what writing advice you are going to take in. And maybe think for a bit what the writer of that advice was trying to target. It may not be something that you need at the moment. Take it sparingly and don't follow it to the letter. There is a big perfectionist culture and it's very hard to get over, but it is possible. So in answer to the first question, can we overcome this? Yep, we can. But it has to start with you. Stop focusing on what everyone else is doing and you'll be fine. You have to find your own writing process. Just find something that is specially crafted for you, not for anyone else. Don't give up, and if you have stopped writing, it's never too late to come back and try again. Maybe you'll be better at it this time. If you struggle with your original book, then leave it aside for the time being at least and try something new just for the sake of it. Something that is just there to entertain you. I started my current book out that way and now it is the most important project I've ever worked on. You're still here. Good. I hope some of this advice has helped you, but remember, just because it worked for me might not mean that it will work for you. And that's what I'm trying to get at. Experiment and find out what does. I'll be tackling some more of these topics in future videos, specifically bad writing advice, but also a lot on cliches because I feel like I'd really love to address that one because I'm so passionate about it. What I'm trying to say is to learn to enjoy writing again, because the struggle happens when we lose that. Be a bit more optimistic and more creative. Give yourself some space to try out new ideas and go in different directions that maybe you've never gone into before. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments below and whether there's any other advice that has hindered you from writing to your fullest. Hope to be talking more about this in the future when I get time to make more videos. See ya!